we're finding out that many conservative Christians never really believed that abortion is murder, which would explain why they've been so incompetent at legally ending it. My name is Jacob Brunton. I'm here with Cody Leibel, and this is FTNCI for the New Christian Intellectual. We are talking about the topic of abortion, which has come to the forefront of the news recently. And in that storm of news and headlines, there is another storm of controversy within the SBC regarding what our goals in the abortion debate should be. And we are finding through that controversy that many who we thought were conservative Christians, who were pro-life, who agreed with us that abortion is murder, we're finding out that many of those people actually disagree with us in a very fundamental implication of the idea that abortion is murder, namely, whether or not the women who procure abortions should be criminalized by the legal code. And we found this out primarily through the ERLC's opposition to the recent Louisiana bill, which would criminalize a woman who seeks out and procures an abortion. They opposed that bill and in fact helped to defeat that bill because they disagree with that position, that a woman who procures and seeks out an abortion should be criminalized for it, should be punished for it. That they actively fought against and killed a bill which would make abortion illegal in the state of Louisiana because that bill included the criminalization of women who seek out abortions. That is atrocious. And that has led to the current controversy that we want to now explore.
It turns out that the conservatives, so-called, at Southern Seminary, including Albert Mohler and Denny Burk, have long held this same position that was argued by the ERLC. Now, in the past, these self-described incrementalists have framed their position as being, we think it's more strategic if you would not take such an extreme all or nothing view on the laws. So the incrementalists might say, if we could put a heartbeat bill in place, protect a child at the age where the heartbeat is detectable in uterus, then therefore we should do that because that would mean that there would be less abortions. That would mean that we'd be saving lives. Now, I've heard from Jordan Hall. Jordan Hall says that he wouldn't write a heartbeat bill, but if it were being voted on, he would vote for it. Talking with you, Jacob, we realized we might write such a bill as long as we could make sure that what we are declaring in the bill is that we believe that all abortion should be illegal, and we're not saying that we are okay with aborting embryo before the heartbeat. We're not saying that, but we are saying that as a means to saving more lives right now, since we don't think it's politically practicable, we will save the lives that we can save now. There is a debate between what you hear calling themselves the incrementalists versus the abolitionists, and we have problems with these terms. And one of the problems is that you could call yourself an incrementalist when your goal is abolition. So already we know there's a problem with the terms. They're not clear. I would speak of perhaps that there's the goal of making abortion illegal and punishing the person who procures the abortion, the person who pays for it, and the person who does the abortion. In some cases, that could be one person. You could just poison yourself and have an abortion, right? That would be one person did all those things. Or it could be three different people. It could be the father, it could be the mother, it could be the doctor. But the point is all three of those are making choices, and all three of those choices are leading to the death of an entity. And so we have to ask ourselves, what is the entity? And this is a debate that Jacob and I are happy to have with anybody about what is that entity that is being aborted. It is a unique human being. And because it is a unique human being, philosophically, we can prove that it has individual rights. It has the right to its own life. We're happy to discuss that with anybody that disagrees with that. But the point is, if someone has taken this unique human being that has rights and killed it, then that is a criminal action. That is, by definition, initiation of force, violation of individual rights. It's a criminal action. That's why we call it criminal. We distinguish between vices and crimes. This is something that falls under the realm of taking the life away from somebody else. So it's a crime.
Yes, we would say that abortion should be treated consistently as murder in the same ways that we would treat murder in various ways, various contexts. We should treat abortion the same way. If there were multiple parties involved with a murder in different respects, they would all be tried according to their involvement. The same way with abortion, right? If the mother requests to have an abortion and requests that somebody else pay for it, perhaps the father or perhaps the government, and requests that somebody else perform it, perhaps a doctor, all three parties are culpable, perhaps in different respects. And perhaps the laws around murder in specific states would have different specific consequences and ways of adjudicating that. But that is all the same as murder itself. If I request that somebody be murdered, and perhaps I don't pay for it, maybe I get somebody else to pay for it, but I'm requesting it, and somebody else actually performs it, I'm still going to be held liable, culpable under laws regarding murder in the state, and I ought to be. We would say it should be the same thing with abortion. So don't allow these legal complications to obscure the principle that abortion is murder. You either believe that it's murder or you don't. And if you believe that it is, then you ought to treat it in all the same ways that you would treat murder, with all those different legal technicalities involved.
But that is not what is held by Albert Mohler or by Denny Burk. So he, at dennyburk.com, we have on May 13th an article called Why Pro-Lifers Support Laws to Punish Abortionists but Not Mothers. Already you can tell that he's being sneaky with the terms. I think by abortionist he means the abortion doctor. But look what he's doing. I mean, to overlook the possibility that an abortion could be committed directly by a woman, by getting some kind of medicine that would cause her to have an abortion, by the coat hanger method or any other method, punching herself in the stomach, anything that causes an abortion, that he's just defined that out of existence, acted as if it doesn't exist. And from the fact that he only wants to talk about the doctors and doesn't even want to mention this as a possibility, that a woman could purposely make herself have an abortion, we can tell he's a fundamentally unserious thinker or that he's dishonest. My personal opinion is both. But that's not just Denny Burke's position, that's also Albert Mohler's position. And so we discovered this article in KentuckyToday.com. It appears to be a transcript of Albert Mohler's podcast, and it was originally posted April 4th, 2016, updated October 6th, 2021. It's called Abortion Back in National Headlines. And we have several quotes that we want to read that would point out what Mohler's position is. But his position is that the, quote, pro-life movement is and always has been a movement to protect more babies and also to protect women. So we treat women like they are not agents in this action of abortion, that they are the victims. And Mohler explicitly identifies that the pro-life movement came out of the feminist movement, which called men the aggressors and called all the women the victims. And he agrees with this idea. He thinks that the pro-life movement should always declare that it is not the women that should be punished. It's not the women that should be held accountable. He's favorably quoting people saying that no pro-lifer would ever want to punish a woman who has chosen abortion. We invite a woman who has gone down this route to consider paths of healing, not punishment. Another favorable description of this idea: the pro-life movement, once again, has never called for the criminalization of women, but rather for the criminalization of the one who kills the baby. That is any doctor or any other person who brings about an abortion of an innocent human child. Now, this is tricky language, because clearly, if you think about it for 5 seconds, you would realize that the person that brought about the abortion could be the woman. So what is he doing here? Is this just sneaky? Is this just hiding his actual position? I don't know. But why would he not say? Why would he not explicitly say if a woman takes this action on purpose, if she's aware of the meaning of the action, if she's not mentally retarded, then she should be criminalized? Why would they not say that? Is there something going on here? Is this just trying to hide the meaning of their position so that they can sneak it in? I don't know what they're doing. But the explicit statement of what they believe is mistaken. It's false.
Yes, and he explicitly says that women should be treated as victims alongside the child that's being aborted. It's just preposterous and really morally twisted.
He does say the woman seeking the abortion is not without moral responsibility. So The woman seeking the abortion is not without moral responsibility, but let's have some nuance here, but she is not herself bringing about the death of the unborn baby. That's the crucial issue here, writes Mohler. And that's why the pro-life movement has consistently sought to criminalize abortion at the level of the person performing the abortion. That's ridiculous. Would you say that if I were to hire somebody to go kill Jacob, that I shouldn't be put in jail or criminalized for that? Oh, I guess Cody's not without responsibility. Mohler, you're a moral incompetent. What are you doing leading an evangelical institution?
Not to mention, as you mentioned earlier, the possibility of a woman directly causing an abortion on herself without the aid of a doctor. That, like you said, Denny Burk and Albert Mohler both pretend that the only time abortions ever take place is in a clinical setting with a doctor. But that is absolutely not the case, and it doesn't have to be the case. Women are capable of causing themselves to have an abortion. And if you made it illegal to have a clinical abortion, women would seek out other ways of having abortions. You know, you've heard about the back alley coat hanger method, but there are other ways too that aren't as obviously explicitly barbaric. That they could find some medication that they know would cause an abortion. They could procure that medication apart from a doctor's prescription or apart from a doctor knowing that they intend to use it for abortion purposes. Or they could use alcohol, or like you said, hitting themselves in the stomach, or all kinds of ways that they could cause an abortion to themselves without the knowing participation of a doctor. Should that be criminalized or not? They will not answer. They refuse to answer because they are being politicians.
We read in Denny Burk's article from May 13th, the pro-life movement has rejected attempts to prosecute women for getting an abortion. But then several days later, on May 19th, in a different article, Denny wrote, we all agree with the goal of ending the scourge of abortion in our nation. So I want to point out what's going on as far as the method of thought of people like this. These are people that believe that you should use laws in order to obtain certain ends. They have an outcome-based approach to seeking justice. And that is the opposite of the view that we take at FTNCI, which is that you should have a procedural-based method of approaching justice, that what you want to do as you establish laws is the laws are designed to make sure that each person has due process protected. So there's a process that is a process of treating each person according to their own rights, treating them fairly, justly, according to their own rights. When somebody has received due process, we cannot guarantee the outcome because, after all, our instruments of justice are just courts and lawyers and judges and juries. You cannot guarantee outcomes, but what you can work to do as your guidestone, as you can say, we're going to have a system that puts into place due process to protect certain rights. It identifies them, and then it has procedures for what happens if somebody claims that something has gone against their rights. Whereas the approach that we see from Albert Mohler, from Denny Burk, it is the same approach that you see with Democrats, that you see with the woke, as far as looking at the outcomes in society, looking at the statistics in society and saying, well, if we could put a law in place that would change the statistical outcomes, then we could justify it. That's an outcome-based approach to justice. And so I think that helps make sense of why he says, well, the pro-life movement, we agree with the goal of ending the scourge of abortion. Okay, so ending the scourge of abortion, but you're not going to define what is criminal in a way that's consistent with reality. So when you say you're ending the scourge of abortion, you only mean piecemeal, one at a time. We're going to decrease the amount of abortions. Maybe we're going to make it illegal to be an abortion doctor professionally. But they don't actually have a goal in mind of ending abortions if they're not going to criminalize procuring abortions. It's inconsistent.
Yes, their view of the law here is consistent with Tim Keller's view of the law. It's outcome oriented. And Tim Keller has argued that, who knows, maybe the Democratic view on abortion is the better, or the Democratic view in general is the better way to end abortion, right? Maybe you would have fewer abortions if the Democrats got everything that they wanted, because the Bible hasn't told us how to end the scourge of abortion. The Bible has just told us that we ought to end it. And so who knows, maybe if we enacted all the Democratic policies, there's a better way to end the scourge of abortion. To which we would respond, no, that is not the purpose of the law. The purpose of the law is not to achieve a particular outcome. The purpose of the law is to establish justice. And so we would say that abortion ought to be made illegal, whether or not that was more or less sufficient in ending abortion, right? So let me put it this way. Even if abortion would actually end by enacting certain democratic policies, like, let's say, for instance, maybe if we offered $5,000 to a woman in exchange for her not getting an abortion, maybe hypothetically that actually would end all abortion. It would still be unjust to do that. Justice means outlawing abortion, not paying people not to get an abortion. For the same reason that justice means outlawing murder, not paying people not to murder each other. So we are talking about a principled approach to the law that is founded in the principle of justice, not some pragmatic outcomes-based approach to the law. They are agreeing with Keller here, and they're agreeing with Russell Moore that rights are never absolute, that no right is ever an absolute, including apparently the right to life. It's not an absolute. If it were an absolute, then we would have to say that the mother who seeks out an abortion is guilty of murder. But they don't want to say that. So they are in effect agreeing with the liberal Russell Moore that rights are never an absolute. They are in effect agreeing with the liberal Tim Keller that the goal of the law is a certain outcome, regardless of whether the principle of justice is secured or not.
Now, I want to also point out what they're doing rhetorically by use of this term, incrementalism. They have been hiding from the public, from their conservative donors, from the pastors within the SBC. They have been hiding the meaning of their position. Because it'd be one thing if they said, we seek to incrementally change the laws in order to criminalize abortion eventually, and criminalize mothers committing abortions eventually. It'd be a whole other thing if they said, oh, we're incrementalist, and then they just defended incrementalism as an idea without ever specifying incrementally moving toward what outcome. This is consistent with the kind of maneuvering that I have seen again and again within the SBC. It's all about playing word games. It's about setting the terms of the debate in such a way that the actual beliefs are going to be obscured. And there's no way to debate the beliefs because now they're going to want to be debating terms. And so now we're going to have people debating whether or not, if you're a 4-point abolitionist, but you don't believe in all 5 of those points, whether you're really an incrementalist or an abolitionist, people are going to be discussing those things rather than discussing something like, should women be criminalized for killing their unborn children? That's the actual debate that we're having here.
There are several topics or issues that are being conflated, and I think intentionally so, by some people. But then also some on the some who agree with us that abortion should be criminalized, including that the mother should be held criminally liable for procuring an abortion. I think some even in that camp unwittingly give in to some of the plays on words and plays on terminology. And let me explain how. So there's the issue of full criminalization. We agree with that. And you could say that that's full abolitionism, whatever you want to call it. There's a separate issue of whether or not you are okay with taking incremental steps toward that goal. And there are some who would agree that abortion should be fully criminalized, who would say we ought not take any incremental steps toward that goal, meaning that they would oppose a heartbeat bill because they would say, no, it's all or nothing. It's full criminalization or nothing. And I'm going to oppose anything short of full criminalization. We would disagree with them. And I think that those people are unwittingly providing cover for guys like Mohler and Denny Burk because it allows them to posture as being against that, when what they're really against is they're really against the full criminalization. See, we would say that it's appropriate and possibly even praiseworthy to endorse incremental steps so long as you are fully explicit that your goal is full criminalization. And you're saying, I'm going to take this incremental step because this is as far as I can go in reaching that goal at this moment. And I'm going to keep pushing to extend that further and further until I get to full criminalization. That would be a moral thing to do. We would disagree with those who would say that you shouldn't take those incremental steps because the only alternative is full criminalization or nothing at all. However, we would disagree with guys like Denny Burk and Albert Mohler, who would say we should only ever take those small incremental steps and we should never get to the point of full criminalization. Obviously, we disagree with them because the goal of the incremental steps, as Cody was saying, is incremental steps toward the goal of full criminalization.
So I propose that before we even get into the discussion nationwide and in churches about how you should be handling this, one thing that should be settled before any of that is the goal criminalization of procuring abortions? And then I think that the next step after that is to ask yourself, are we willing to call people leaders in the church or in the Southern Baptist Convention or in other things like that if they don't explicitly get this right? And so I wrote on Twitter the other day, the first order of business for making abortion illegal should be to require all Christian leaders to declare that giving and procuring elective abortions should be criminalized. It is even more strategic to get fake conservatives out of teaching jobs than it is to pass laws. Why is that? Well, because it's very easy for fake conservatives to cast this web of confusion and then to get the pastors that they've been training to follow them in that confusion. And then those pastors get the people in their churches to not understand, or they don't bother doing the work to help them understand. So the pastor might stand up on the stage at one point and say, abortion is wrong, abortion is evil, we believe that God doesn't approve of abortions, and never bother making the next step, which is it should be criminalized, and you should vote for it to be criminalized. And so there should be petitions against Albert Mohler, against Denny Burk. I petition you, Mohler, to step down from leadership until you're able to ascribe to what is clearly the truth on this fundamentally important conservative issue. You're not a conservative until you can ascribe to this. Albert Mohler is not a conservative. Heads up in case this is a surprise. Albert Mohler is not a conservative. He is a fraud. Denny Burk is not a conservative. Denny Burk is a fraud. And he has been for years. And do you understand now, in light of the fact that you can redefine who they are, can you understand why they've been so completely, catastrophically failures on these issues and on every other conservative issue? Now do you understand why they seem sleepy, why they seem incompetent, why they seem like they're playing both sides? They are. And that is the truth, and you need to hold your leaders to a standard. There should be men standing in the Southern Baptist Convention meeting here in June 2022 saying, I want there to be a resolution that Albert Mohler is not fit for leadership in this convention and that Denny Burk is not fit for leadership in this convention because they do not believe in criminalizing abortion. I don't believe anyone is fit for leadership in this convention. I don't believe anyone is fit for any kind of leadership in this convention if they are not in agreement with the idea of criminalizing all abortion. What kind of convention do you want to have otherwise? Why are you giving money to pastors who are teaching opposite from what's true? What kind of unity do you think you have with the sons of Satan, or with their apologists, or with the compromisers and appeasers like Albert Mohler, whose motives we don't understand and don't really want to?
And if Mohler and Denny Burk have this position, you can guarantee that dozens, hundreds, possibly thousands of other leaders in the Southern Baptist Convention and in evangelicalism at large also hold to this position. And so it's not just that we need to explicitly condemn those who have defended explicitly this position. We need to have all leaders and all pastors sign off on where they stand on this issue. You need to ask your pastor tomorrow, where do you stand on this? Do you believe that abortion should be fully criminalized for everyone involved? Yes or no? You need to ask them. And you need to require that of every seminary leader, of every seminary president, of every seminary faculty member, of every church staff member. This needs to be required of anyone who is going to be in any sort of leadership position, who is going to receive any dollar or cent of your tithes or of the tithes of other faithful Christians. They need to make their view on this explicit now.
The consequences if we let this go by and if we don't require this of our leaders is that we're going to have leaders that are playing the ends against the middle. And you know what that means is that they are getting conservative donations in order to speak liberal messages or liberally acceptable messages to liberals. And I can see why, if they are pragmatists without principles or moral reasoning, they might want to do this because they think, oh, well, the people that are coming to my church, many of them are liberals. Some of them are voting for Democrats, and I want them to not be turned away, and I want them to not stop listening to me. But ask yourself this: what's the point of them listening to you if you don't have anything true to say, and if you don't have anything that challenges them worth saying? And I've experienced this before. I've asked a pastor where I was a member at a church, and I asked this pastor. This was a Sovereign Grace church, by the way. I asked the pastor, what is your position on abortion? And he said, well, it's evil. And this was in an email exchange, and he was being slippery. He says it's a moral evil, and we should seek to reduce abortions and eliminate abortions. But he wouldn't say you shouldn't vote for pro-abortion candidates. When I asked him, he would change the subject. He wouldn't answer my question squarely. He wouldn't say it should be criminalized. And over time, I thought more about it. Why would he not want to say what his position is? And they're usually going to appeal to some sort of, well, as a pastor, I don't want to get too much into politics. As a pastor, I think that I need to be careful not to get into these divisive issues. And maybe you don't need to know what I think as a pastor about all these different topics. Well, you know what? That is a self-protecting policy, but it is not a God-glorifying policy. And so when you find somebody that is approaching you with that mindset, you would say to them, as my pastor, as somebody who I consider to be a leader, as somebody who I'm donating money to, I do need to know what you believe about these topics. And I do need to know whether you're willing to speak about them publicly. And if you're not willing to speak about them publicly, then what am I paying you for? If you're not willing to speak about them publicly, then what truth do you believe that you are entrusted by God to deliver to the world? Now, I've seen this happen in more churches than just that one church. But I've realized that it's either a product of pragmatism, the lack of principles, or perhaps cowardice. Some people, it's just a personal cowardice. It's not even, oh, how can we make more Christians by the pragmatic business model. For some people, it's literally, I don't want people to disapprove of me. I'm afraid. And this ties into a broader issue, some of the broader issues that we talk about at FTNCI a lot, this social metaphysic, this idea that I know what's true because my tribe affirms it. And so then Christians go to the church, the pastor tells them what they all believe, and it's the gospel light, the Bible light. It's a general narrative that we can all generally agree to. So now we have this unity here. We are a body of people who all affirm this. And so the individual people at the church feel that they're part of a collective, and the collective has agreed that something is true, and therefore they can accept it as true. And the pastor, he has said something that his people agree with. He has a flock, and that flock legitimizes his position. The flock, the agreement with the flock, legitimizes his belief in this idea. And so then as a result, you have pastors that are over time only willing to say that which is capable of attracting a certain kind of flock in a certain social setting. And you have flocks congregating only around pastors that are willing to do that kind of thing. And within these flocks, which I believe the Southern Baptist Convention is, generally speaking, an aggregate of such flocks, but not just the Southern Baptist Convention. Within these flocks, the principle that you use to determine what is true and what we can really know for sure is what is it that we're all capable of agreeing on. And that is the social metaphysic. and that is a metaphysic for cowards, compromisers. And if you want to know why the SBC looks like it's a convention of cowards and compromisers, it's because it is. And may God destroy it.
Amen. And much of evangelicalism. We're focusing on Southern Baptist Convention here because it has some of the most prominent proponents of some of these evil views, and because it's one of the largest denominations. But much of evangelicalism in general follows suit in similar fashion, whether it's other seminaries like RTS and Westminster and things like that, or other denominations. That much of modern day evangelicalism across denominational and other doctrinal differences follows this same method of a social metaphysic, of being cowardly and incompetent, of not saying what you truly believe, or of basing what you believe off of what is going to be popular, whether implicitly or explicitly. There is a plague of, like Cody said, a social metaphysic. There's a plague of cowardice. There's a plague of the refusal to think independently, to make value judgments independently, to say this is true, this is just, this is good, and all of that is not. And we need to teach it from the pulpit to our sheep. That's what Christianity ought to be doing. That's how Christianity is supposed to be salt and light to the world. Christianity is supposed to influence culture, not be influenced by it. But everything that evangelicalism stands for today, in the tone police, in the winsomeness Gestapo, as Matt Marino would call it, in the obsession with being moderate and winsome and evangelistic, all of that is bent around the social metaphysic, which insists that we ought to be influenced by the culture rather than the other way around. There's one thing to notice about these pastors and these preachers and these professors and these seminary leaders. It is that they are being hypocrites often, but that's not the point. The point of the hypocrisy charge here is to show you a deeper problem. The reason I say they're being hypocrites is that they have no problem speaking about political issues or justice issues when it comes to topics that are palatable to the current culture, like social justice, like racial division, or whatever the case may be. In fact, they often beat their chests about how they would have stood up against the pro-slavery positions of the past. They often claim that they would have stood against slavery, that they would have preached against slavery had they been alive back then. But they're demonstrating through their incompetence, through their cowardice, through their appeasement on this issue, this most important issue of justice today, namely the issue of the slaughter of unborn children in the womb. Through their incompetence and cowardice on that, they are demonstrating that they absolutely would have been the incompetents, the cowards, the appeasers on the slavery issue back in the day. They would have been the ones saying, pipe down, William Wilberforce. They would have been the ones saying, we need to just go along to get along. We needed to not speak publicly about this issue. Don't preach on this. It's going to be divisive. We need to be incremental. Let's not abolish slavery all at once. Let's insist on small incremental measures where we don't say explicitly that we believe that African Americans have equal rights as whites in the United States. We're not going to say that. We're just going to say that, yes, slavery is an evil and it's a scourge, and we would like for it to be diminished over time, but we're not going to criminalize it. We're not going to want to abolish it. That's exactly what these men would have been doing back then, because that's exactly what they're doing on a more important issue, namely abortion now. How much worse is slaughtering innocent children in the womb than enslaving blacks? As horrible as that was, this, what we're talking about with abortion today, is infinitely more atrocious. And they're playing the coward on this issue. They're playing the appeaser on this issue. They are the ones that they claim to be morally condemning in the past. They are those men. When they get up and they speak and they beat their chests against the evils of slavery in the past, they are preaching against themselves. They are guilty. And I believe that on Judgment Day, God will play those words of them preaching against slavery as just condemnation against themselves and their cowardice on the topic of abortion today.
They are all going to appeal to unity. They always do. They're going to say, we shouldn't be listening to the abolitionists. Don't listen to them because we need unity. The hypocrisy even of that line escapes them. But they're going to say that they are the representatives of unity. And our response is, what fellowship does light have with darkness? What kind of unity do you as a Christian want with a man like Denny, Burk, or Albert Mohler? What kind of unity ought you to have? Because there can be no compromise between what is right and wrong. If you try to compromise it, it's going to be like slipping poison into your food. A little poison and a lot of good food means a dead person. You cannot compromise with men like this. You cannot allow them to be your leaders. And so while they preach unity, the Christians that believe in the Bible and that have moral courage are going to look at them and say, I do not want unity any longer with a man like you. And God forgive me for ever seeking that kind of unity, because I should have paid enough attention to decide what it was that I was being unified to. What is it? Identify the facts. And that's the whole thing that abortion fails to do. It's just an evasion. What is it? Identify the facts. Well, it's potentially something that could cause me to be inconvenienced. No, what is it? It's something that's going to change the life of the mother. It's going to ruin her career. What is it? It's a human being. And that is enough to know what's right and wrong in this situation. Even a 4-year-old kid can look at this and know what's right and wrong in this situation. And the fact that we have placed men that don't know right and wrong in charge of evangelical institutions, political institutions, media, ultimately, it's a moral failure on our part. And so don't just look at a man like Denny Burk and say that the moral failure is on his part. Look at your own life and ask yourself, have you ever been willing to go to a school board meeting? Have you ever been willing to go to a church meeting and say, Pastor, I'd like you to proclaim this to be true. And if you're not willing to, then I'd like to ask the rest of us to just leave. What area do you have control over? What it may look like is finding people like me and Jacob or other people that have online platforms and giving them your prayers and giving them your help. What it may look like is creating videos like you see us doing. What it may look like is, if you're well connected personally, then taking advantage of your personal connections and using them for something and calling people into the kind of project where you say, we are going to get together and we're going to have a meeting and figure out what to do about this, because Albert Mohler doesn't belong in the Southern Baptist Convention, or because the Southern Baptist Convention doesn't need to exist anymore. And so we're going to figure out a way to make it not exist anymore. And we're going to take as much of the Egyptians' gold with us as we can when we leave. We're going to take as many of the buildings as we can when we leave, but we're going to leave it in the dirt. We're going to leave it less than it was when we found it. Whatever it is that you decide that you need to do, take responsibility, because we are talking about institutions over time that teach people what kind of souls they should have. We are talking about institutions over time that shape hearts, that shape votes, that shape laws, that shape whether people will live or die. And that's what is at stake. And so be careful with who you support. The pro-life movement is dead. That term is dead. But the movement for protecting the unborn can begin as soon as that movement dies. So steward your resources well. Thank you for listening to this episode of For the New Christian Intellectual. We believe in helping Christians in their moral reasoning. If you'd like to get our email updates, go to christianintellectual.com/subscribe. Please keep us in prayer as we seek God's wisdom about how we can get this message to more people. Thank you for listening today, and God bless.
Amen.